anything that you think is really important coming out of the new administration that should take office in January that's not in front of us 24/7 on the media, like the SecDef confirmation process or the border stuff, which I think has gotten played out a lot in the media. What do you think is important that we're not really hearing about from this new administration coming in?
Well, let me just give you the broad parameters of what's going on. I mean, I think that there's no question that there's been just a bump up in the economy since the November 5th elections. I mean, people feel more confident. You see people with more of a bounce in their step. Not just of Republicans, but even Democrats are starting to come around the idea that maybe Trump doesn't have horns coming out of his head, that he can do good things for the economy. That isn't too surprising because, as you know, Arthur, your dad and I wrote a book called The Trump Economic Miracle, and we talked about all the amazing things that happened to the economy when he was president in his first term, and there's no reason we can't see a return to that kind of high level of growth, big income gains for all Americans, including minorities, why we can't become energy independent again. I mean, I could go on and on. But I guess what I'm saying is investors should feel bullish and continue to feel bullish about the possibilities of this administration. Now, you know, I remember when Reagan came in 1981, the first year was really tough. You'll remember that, Nancy, when the stock market did very poorly. It took about 18 months for Reagan's policies to really kick in, especially those tax cuts. But I'm really hoping that we get this tax bill done in the first 150 days of his administration. He has a voter mandate. They were successful policies. We reduced the corporate tax rate. We made investment basically instant write-off. We call that capital expenditure write-offs. And Nancy, you were saying earlier on this show that we're just blowing away the rest of the world in investment. And I think one of the reasons for that was the tax cut. There were other really positive features to that, but I think that's going to happen. I think we are going to get secure in our border, which is something Americans want. But we also need more labor, so we're going to need more legal immigration. And finally, I think there's a lot of room for producing more American energy, whether it's oil, gas, coal, nuclear power. We have really unlimited resources in this country to do it, which would drive down energy prices. And when you drive down energy prices, that is a great way to stop inflation.
Yeah, that's awesome. And do you think we'll get 100% expensing, Steve, in the CapEx part of the bill?
Yeah, so that was one of the big features of our bill that we passed in 2017. And that's being, as you know, Nancy, that's being phased out gradually. In fact, I think the first step of phasing that out happened last year. And we can't allow that to happen. We have to continue to allow 100% expenditure write-offs the first year. I remember talking to Fred Smith at one of the LAFR conferences, and Fred Smith said, the FedEx chairman, he said, we 5 more planes. Those are, really expensive investments. He said, we bought those because of the tax cut and the fact that we could write off the expenditures. So there were a lot of really positive features. We cut in half the number of people who had to deal with the unfair death tax. We got rid of, for most Americans, the alternative minimum tax. And of course, we cut our corporate tax rate from the highest in the world, 40%, down to about half that, at about 21%. So on balance, it was a very pro-growth bill, and the market really responded very positively to that as well.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, if we could rewrite history and move COVID, it would have really continued to just grind through the.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if it hadn't been for COVID, Trump probably would have won a 40-state re-election landslide back in 2020. But, here we are in 2024. I talked to the president, a few days ago. He's very committed to getting this bill done as quickly as possible. As I said earlier, he's got a voter mandate to do it. And, there will be some other cats and dogs in this with respect to, not taxing tips and some of the other things he talked about. But the other big issue, Nancy, that, I get asked a lot about, I'm sure you do, you and Arthur do as well, is what's going to happen on the tariff front. And that worries me a little bit. I mean, I'm a free trader like you guys are, like Arthur LaFleur is, senior. And we need to make sure that we're not going to undermine world trade with tariffs. I don't think we will. I think Trump will be very shrewd about this, but it is a risky agenda.
Yeah.
And you think they're going to have to wait, Steve, for the open seats to get filled? So you think he's going to work on other stuff first, like the executive orders, and then focus on the tax policy, April?
Yeah, I think that, by the way, I should have said this at the outset, that, within the first hours that Trump is in the White House, that's on January, I think, 21st, it's going to be at least 50, maybe 100 executive orders reversing a lot of the crazy things that Biden had done, including, remember, people forget that Biden's first agenda item when he came into the office was to kill the Keystone XL pipeline, which never really made any sense. If we want more infrastructure, why would we kill infrastructure? And pipelines are a very important part of getting our oil and gas all over the country in an environmentally and economically feasible way. So I think you're going to see more energy infrastructure for sure once Trump enters the White House.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I saw something really interesting that the strategy, and Steve, you were early and right on fracking, and I remember you giving a speech where at my previous firm, and you'd just written the book, and you were 100% right. But then the strategy became, they've overinvested in capital expenditures and infrastructure at the underlying energy companies. And so then the strategy was, let's return all the cash to shareholders. And I just saw that has now crossed over. And the companies are back to spending on building infrastructure, which that surprised me. You may have already known that, but I was astonished that they've anticipated and started to spend again.
Well, I believe you're correct, and I also think that now is not the best time to be investing in some of these green energy sources, because I think one of the top priorities for Trump and his team will be to get rid of a lot of those subsidies, and that means that all the subsidies for electric batteries and for wind and solar power and carbon capture programs and so on, they may be a thing of the past. We'll see, but I hope that whole bill that they called the Inflation Reduction Act, that I call it the Inflation Acceleration Act, I hope we get rid of that. There's about $500 billion of spending in that bill that we don't need to do, that's not going to benefit the economy. And Trump should just rescind that funding, or at least not allow it to continue for 2 or 3 more years. I mean, I am concerned about the size of our debt. I think every American is. It's running at close to $2 trillion a year increase, and we're at 36, 37 trillion on our debt. That is a cancer, and it has to be stopped through economic growth and through cutting spending, not by cutting, raising taxes, cutting spending, because this fiscal crisis we have was created by out of control spending.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's going to take Congress to correct that.
What's that?
That's going to take Congress to address that issue.
Well,
right?
see, now you're making a great point, because I was just looking at the latest numbers, and it looks like the Republicans are going to have about 2 or 3 or maybe a 4-seat majority out of 435. That's a very slim margin. It means they can at most leave 2 votes.
Yeah.
Lose 2 votes and still pass things. So it's a really precarious situation. The Senate's a little better at 53, but still, that means if you get 3 or 4 Republicans to walk away from the table, it might be hard. However, I will say this, and this may surprise some of your clients, but I think that there's a chance we can get Democrats to vote for some of these things. A lot of the ideas are common sense, and to vote against extending the Trump tax cuts is to vote for a $2,000 increase in taxes every year on middle-class families.
In an high inflationary environment.
Yeah.
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 Arthur, you were going to ask about the global wave, and I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, Steve, we were talking about this morning. You were talking about some of the elections that you were keeping an eye on, and I think you called it a Trumpian wave or something to that effect. It mentioned like France and Germany, but obviously the old man, Dr. Laffer, was just down in Argentina and sent back some great pictures of that trip. But what do you think about what's going on globally?
Well, I wrote a column just today that I'd love to tell you guys about, because and it's based in part because I saw what happened in Argentina when your dad, Arthur Laffer Sr., went to Buenos Aires and was treated like a king. And, we had a real meeting of the minds with Javier Milei. And so I think you're going to see Trumpism this kind of populist revolt against, arrogant, oversized, selfish government. I think you're going to see it spread throughout the world. I think Trumpism is going to come to Europe. I think it's going to come to the UK. I think it will be in other words, I think you're going to see a toppling of these governments. You're starting to see the signs of that. Look what happened in France last week, where the prime minister was ousted, and Japan earlier, a month or so ago, where the prime minister and the ruling party was thrown out. UK, I think the Labour Party's in big trouble. They've got a prime minister who's the least popular man in Britain right now. So I think that this idea of putting people first and putting your country first is really catching on around the world. And I think that's an exciting thing, because it's really an affirmation of individual control and free markets. And that's really critical to economic growth. So this could be not just Trumpism in America, but Trumpism writ large around the world. I don't know how you feel about that, Nancy. I know you follow these things very closely, but I think you could see a lot of upheaval.
I think it's super interesting. It's very Reagan-esque, Thatcher-esque, and then the other countries that followed along. Arthur probably knows better than I, even though he was just a child. But you were sitting at the knees of the great one. But yeah, I think it's going to be fun to watch for sure. And I always find it interesting, and then I'll turn it back over to both of you, but that, we're always hearing about corporate greed and how corporate America has gotten too big, but we never hear about government greed. And that's really your point, Steve, I think, is that, it's the government is there to serve the people, not to continue to consume every spare piece of capital in the world. But I digress. So back to you two.
Well, that's a great point.
Like money.
A lot about corporate greed and the kind of unseemly profits of American companies and so on. But the truth is, we've had a lot of. I think you used the term government greed, and I think that's true. I mean, we have hundreds and hundreds of billions, not millions, billions of dollars that's wasted, that is involved in fraud or inefficiency or redundancy or obsolescence. We've got to get rid of these programs, and we've got to replace them with programs that do work. And I think that will clearly be the agenda for Donald Trump. And there's nobody better to do this, by the way, than Elon Musk, who, basically when he took over Twitter, he cut their expenses by 70%, and all of a sudden they're making a huge profit again.
Yeah, and the joke's on everyone else.
Steve, I'm sure you saw this, but did you see the California legislature was meeting about the homeless money they'd spent? It was like $40-something billion over the last couple of years. And they couldn't tell them where the money went. They couldn't tell them who it was spent on. They couldn't tell them anything other than the fact that homelessness increased. It was like $40 billion. And they said, well, the IT guy's not here. We don't have that. I mean, it was something you just couldn't make up.
Well, I mean, it's a reflection of the fact that the politicians, especially in Washington, kind of lost touch with the government, and they started advancing their own agenda on everything from runaway government spending to allowing the debt to go through the roof to, always talking about raising taxes, never about cutting government spending, about letting, 6'2" men play in women's volleyball, leagues. I mean, there was a, I think that the left in the world has kind of ran away from common sense. And, by the way, I don't agree with everything Donald Trump wants to do. I mean, most of the things I agree with, some of the things I strongly disagree with. But, for the most part, they're popular programs that he wants to put in place that are, supported by the average working class American.
All right. Well, I have one question, and then I don't know how much time we have, Arthur. That's up to you. But I would hate to not see you on TV every day. But what's the deal? Are you going to go to the administration?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think so. But obviously, I have a good relationship with the president, as does Arthur Laffer and Larry Kudlow. And obviously, Nancy, if the president asks you to do something, you have a patriotic duty to do that. So, but I love what I do. I love working with Arthur Laffer and Steve Forbes and Larry Kudlow and others. And I have a great life. And I'm so optimistic about the, possibilities here. And I felt like, in the first term, when Laffer, Forbes, or I had something to tell Trump, we just go into the Oval Office and we talk to him. And you know that, Arthur, you've got a bunch of those pictures on your wall there in the office there of us standing right behind Trump in his chair in the Oval Office. So, but I just want to help him do whatever he wants to do to make America great again. And it's a good agenda. It's a strong, and it's popular agenda with people. And if he pulls this off, I think you're going to see, you're going to see Dow 50,000. You're going to see continued increase in number of companies. By the way, I'm very happy about Paul Atkins has been named the head of the SEC, and one of his objectives is to make it easier for companies to go public. We need more publicly traded companies. We need more IPOs, and companies have been hesitant to do it because of all the regulations and things like Sarbanes-Oxley. And so a lot of firms have just, remained private. That's a problem for I don't have any problem with private companies, but we do need more publicly traded companies that every American can invest in.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think isn't the Russell 5000 now 3,500 or 3,200 stocks instead of 5,000? So that's a great point. I hadn't thought about that. Well, Arthur?
No, I think we're going to let Steve go, Nancy. Steve, thank you very much for calling in and chatting with us, and Godspeed to everything you're doing. Obviously, America needs good policies. It's good for workers. It's good for incomes. It's hopefully energy policy.
Well, thanks, guys. I mean, you guys have been really great for your investors. You've made some really great picks. And Nancy, you're one of the, you and I have known each other for, 25 years at least. And
Nice.
I've always been a great admirer of yours. You've made a lot of money for your clients, and that's what it's all about. I have a radio show called More Money on WABC, and that's what I want to do, is make more money for people, and I know that's what the two of you want to do as well, make more money for everybody.